Jews. They were fighting Romans, they were fighting Greeks, they were fighting Syrians, they were fighting Egyptians. And as we shall see, they were fighting many, many other nations before. Why were they fighting? What is that they had to fight for? Interestingly enough, the reason they were fighting, and that is a highly unusual motive in history, especially ancient history, they were fighting for their religion. They were actually prepared to die for what they believed in. An unusual situation, because as we discussed, both Greeks and Romans took religion seriously, but they were open in terms of the religion. Yeah, you have your gods, I have my gods. Let's go merge our gods. You bring your gods to Rome, we will worship them. Sort of the notion that there are many gods and all gods could be useful was universal, except for the Jews. They had their God, and this God gave them the law, and they were prepared to die for the law. Now, it's very hard to present the entire law of the Jews. So let us look at a remarkable summary of Jewish law, which is given to us in the 26th chapter of Deuteronomy. There was a feast, one of the main feasts of the Jews, called Shavuot, Pentecost. And now it is, of course, celebrated as a feast of giving of the Torah, of the law. But it wasn't so originally, at least the Bible does not indicate that. It was the feast of first fruits. Something wonderful grows, and before you eat it, you bring first fruits to the temple as a sacrifice. So, and when you bring them, you're supposed to stand up and say these words. I'm going to read them, because they are so wonderful and they give us a very short summary of what they actually believed. So, what a Jew would say, a wandering Aramean was my father, and he went down into Egypt and sojourned there, few in number. And there he became a nation, great, mighty, and populous. And the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us and laid upon us hard bondage. Then we cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. And the Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with great terror, with signs and wonders. And he brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And behold, now I bring the first of the fruits of the ground, which thou, O Lord, hast given me. It is an amazing text because it shows that at the center of this religion is historical experience. Again, one could say, well, maybe they didn't go to Egypt. It doesn't matter. At the center of the religion stands the story of first wandering Aramean, or as a modern translation to sort of make it more understandable, a Syrian refugee. Aramean is a Syrian, and wandering means a refugee. So Syrian refugee goes to Egypt with a small group, with his little tribe, and they become a large tribe. And they get oppressed, and they escaped, and they're given the land. That is the story of the law. So, of course, you have to read it yourself. There is no possibility for me to describe this remarkable story. It is a wonderful adventure, by the way, on your own. It is a little bit hard, and I prepared a little path for you to enable you to actually read the text. First of all, I claim, it's not a very original idea, that maybe the original text was not quite Pentateuch, 5 books, but Hexateuch, 6 books. That Joshua was part of the original thing. And indeed, if we take this confession of faith, is our plan. Joshua is, because the land comes with Joshua. Right? But actually, I say that maybe the original Hexateuch was a Pentateuch, meaning it included 4 first books, excluding Deuteronomy, and Joshua. Deuteronomy is a remarkable book, but it's on its own. It's a separate text which needs to be studied and understood separately. So, and then there is a remarkable thing which you could do. When we read these books, we see that they're stitched together. The author put it together. And very often, we could unstitch it. So that's what I propose here. I unstitched this stuff so that what you have is a fairly long historic narrative. You are not going to learn much about cooking kids in their mother's milk or not. That we will learn later. When you have time, you could study. But this is a consistent narrative which will cover the story, the initial story of Israel and its establishment. Again, I cannot cover it all, but I have to cover at least a part of it. And the most remarkable part of this story comes from the following revolutionary idea. Everybody had a tribal god. That was not a particularly novel idea. So when this text which we just read says, God of our fathers, everybody had a god of their fathers. This is a tribal god. So the tribal god of the Jews, called Yahweh, was a normal thing. I mean, they had this god. But they came up with a totally crazy idea, word-shaking idea. They said that our tribal god, the god of this little tribe which went to Egypt, 70 people, it's a little group. It's actually the creator of the universe. He's the universal God. That nobody ever would dream of such a claim. But they did. And I want to attract your attention to the following fact, that several billion people actually agree with them. Christians agree with them. Muslims agree with them. You say, oh, Muslims. No, Muslims do agree. They accept the God of this little tribe as their God. It's a remarkable fact. So, therefore, they took this story and added a prehistory, the foundational thing which connected their experience as a nation, the experience of Exodus from Egypt, to the universal history of the world. And the book is called Genesis. So I will try to give you some flavor of Genesis, specifically so that you could read it. And let me just a few sentences about that. Sort of, you have to use what I taught you before about reading Homer. You have to get into the story. It doesn't matter, it does, but it doesn't matter for that purpose whether you believe in God or not. But you have to assume when you read this story that there is this God there. Otherwise, the story makes no sense. As we shall see, he takes active part in this story. So you have to read the text as it meant to be read. Again, it's actually good if you do another thing. In some sense, it's good to take your presuppositions. For example, if you are a believer, some of us are, unenlightened, stupid people like me, it's better to take off our hats and read it as a text. Forget my catechism. Not permanently, but just temporarily, and read the text. Then, of course, I'll have to reconcile my belief system with the text. But I have, first of all, read the text and see what, not read my beliefs into it, but to get the beliefs of the text. Okay? So, starting it's the book of Genesis, and I have to start it, of course, with its original name, Bereshit. And I'm going to attempt to do an impossible thing and chant the first verse of that in Hebrew. You will forgive me, my Hebrew is atrocious. But nevertheless, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'haaretz chayeta tofu vavohu v'choshech על פני תהום ורוח אלוהים מרחפת על פני המים ויאמר אלוהים יהי אור ויהי אור. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. So the first words of Genesis are, as it were, the summary, great summary of everything. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In some sense, you could stop there. That's the whole point. By the way, for Semites, or Jews in this particular case, they didn't have word cosmos. These are these, brainy Greeks. Now I could remove the keeper. They didn't have a word for cosmos. To describe cosmos, the universality of all, they had to use this contrast, heavens and the earth. Right? They often use it when they want to talk about the universal knowledge. They'll say good and evil. They didn't have abstract nouns. Don't forget, they were very concrete. The beauty of Hebrew thought, it's not its abstractness. These are Greeks, but it's concreteness. It's sort of ability to see the world in terms of immediate things there. So, as we shall see, Genesis is a remarkable book. It's 50 chapters, and we could split it roughly at first 11 chapters, which tells us about the origin of the world. This is prehistory. And then the second part, from chapter 12 to chapter 50, is the story of patriarchs. And, let me just quickly say, we're talking about patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Of course, Abraham gets a good 13 chapters. Isaac gets, be 1 chapter. He's squeezed. He's a poor fellow. We shall see. He had difficult life. And then Jacob gets a good thing, but of course not as much as one of his sons. The book is concluded with the remarkable, very long story of Joseph and his trip to Egypt. Probably the longest story in the Bible. It goes from chapter 36 to chapter 50. There are some inserts there, but it's a large, large chunk, very long, beautiful, and clearly not made out of segments, right? Sort of while Genesis has this structure where you see stitches, then there is this beautiful, hard, sort of really one of the most beautiful stories in world literature as a long continued story with a couple of insertions here and there. Again, don't forget, they didn't have DAGs, they had to linearize things. So they would often insert things. And occasionally I didn't, cut in my recommendation for reading Genesis. There are some pieces you don't really need to read, but it's hard for me to cut every 5 lines. So read everything. Genesis is quite wonderful. So first 11 chapters start with 2 accounts of creation. Why 2? Why not? There is this generosity in the book. It often gives you more than you need to know. 1 account of creation is wonderful, but it has 2, and of course they are entirely different. Creation is such a big thing. So you cannot, even 3 accounts wouldn't be too many, but 2. And first account is a beautiful poetical piece structured in terms of days. And people would say, he didn't mean days, these are probably periods of time. No, he meant days. Let us read the text the way it stands. He talks about days. So, God created first the light. He said, let there be light. Because before that, what was before? I read it in Hebrew and you didn't understand. I apologize. So, what was before was that the earth was void and empty, or void and formless. Again, the author tries to present this image of sort of utterly disorganized matter. And there was darkness on top of the abyss. There is this ocean of water. Water is the chaotic thing. For most people, just look at the ocean. It's frightening. These big waves. And it's dark. It's absolute darkness. Right? And the ocean is sort of infinite. Now, not probably finite, but very big. So, darkness. And what do you have? And then you have the Spirit of God, Ruach Elohim. The Spirit of God hovering, if you like, as a bird over the waters. Guys, this is poetry. Those of you who say, no, I read the book on astronomy, and there was no. This is poetry. You have to learn to recognize poetry. So, this is chaotic thing. And then God says, let there be light. Fiat lux, language which I know better than Hebrew. So, let there be light. And there is light. Again, God doesn't need to do anything, the light just comes. So we have this thing and light. Light is the most primitive, basic thing which turns things into livable space. Think about it, we are naturally feel terrible in the dark. When I was little, I was afraid of the dark. Dark means something evil. Naturally, I'm not trying to tell you that indeed there are some things in the dark. They are. But you know, we all felt it. So, and God brings the light. And he separates light from darkness. There is this great job of creation, includes separation. And then he names, again, another great thing God does. He names light day and darkness night. Again, for Hebrew thinking, word naming is central to giving existence, if you like. A named thing does not exist. And this is ontological naming. It's like really making it so. They are what they are now. So, and God looks at what he just did, and he says, it is good. Because it is good. And there is evening and there is morning, the first day. It goes through these days, 6 days of creation. They're wonderfully structured. There are 3 days and 3 days. And there is a beautiful music there. Because the first day, God creates one thing. The second day, God creates one thing. The third day, God creates 2 things. The fourth day, God creates one thing. The fifth day, God creates one thing. The sixth day, God creates 2 things. So it is ta, 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 ta. The 7th day. We'll get to the 7th day. Yes? It's music, right? And music in many respects sort of is one of the ways you could illustrate what is going on there. Again, this is a great plan. I mean, a person was trying to describe the creation of the universe on a page. Huh? Amazing job. So, on the 2nd day, of course, the firmament is created. Because when you look up, you could see this firmament, the dome of the sky. It's transparent, and there is waters on the other side. That's why it's blue. Yes? So what God does, it creates the firmament, which separates waters on this side from this huge, enormous supply of waters on the other side of the firmament, of the dome. And God doesn't say that it is good on the 2nd day, because maybe it's somewhat incomplete. There is a profound, when you read all kind of commentaries, there are millions of explanations why he doesn't say only on the 2nd day that what he created is good. And on the 3rd day, and this is one of the explanations, is that on the 3rd day he completes the work of the 2nd day by separating water from the earth. And he calls earth and water he calls ocean. And now, at the same 3rd day, he creates vegetation. And, you know, the author does a spectacular job of classifying all the sort of the vegetations. He says, grasses and trees. And you say, well, it's not complete. This is pretty good, guys. This is amazingly good classification. Well, you look, it's grasses and trees, what we have. Yeah, yeah, I know animal kingdom, whatever, vegetable kingdoms and all of that, but it's this is poetry. So these are 3 days. But in some sense, now what we have different spheres of action where you could have. We have the sky, we have the waters and air, and we have the earth. And they're not populated. Herbs do not count, you know. They don't move. So the first triple populates the world with things which they move. So first, on the fourth day, God creates these lights and puts them on the firmament. It's an amazing thing, by the way. All other nations look at sun and moon and stars and planets and immediately say they're gods. Remember Mars and Venus? No. This book says they're lights, meaning like something very domesticated. I mean, you know, lights you put so that you could see around and to tell us the days and the years and things like that to establish measure. So the first thing is populated and it is good. So actually only second day the this is good is not there. Then we're coming to the end. There are two more areas to populate, the water and the air. And that was created on the fifth day. Fish, actually better than just fish. All the great monsters of the deep, Leviathan, is created on the, and then fish. So, but don't forget, I mean, the writer clearly wants to incorporate everything. So he knows there is Leviathan. He heard from his Babylonian neighbors. They say, oh, there is this big monster. He said, okay, our God created him. Yes? So here he goes, Leviathan, and the fish, and then the birds. So, and then on the sixth day, we come to the conclusion of the creation. The conclusion of the creation comes on the ground. This is where the final step is. And there are two steps. Remember, ta, 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 ta. So the two steps on the sixth day is the first step, is creation of all the animals. Yes? And cattle, and all kinds. And then finally comes this mysterious moment. God says, let us create man. Let us, one God. We don't know that God is one. Of course, God is the creator and he is the supreme God. But he obviously has some heavenly court. Some, now we might say angels, but I don't think the author of the text would have thought of them as angels. He needs to account for all these minor gods of the nations. Egyptians, they are the court. They are serving God the Creator. So that's whom he is addressing. He looks at his court and let us, he says. Again, we have to read. I mean, all the explanations will tell you other things, but the text is very clear. He says, let us, and he is addressing, and there are mentions, multiple mentions to the scriptures of heavenly court. So that's the heavenly court. So he says, let us create man. And he creates man in his own image and likeness. In his likeness, he creates him. The man and woman, he creates them. These are the words. That is, the creation of man is clearly creation of this man and woman thing. They are one. He created them. This is a great job he did, clearly. But now he needs to instruct, and the simple instruction he gives to man, and man is clearly viewed through the narratives. Again, I'm not going to argue of that position of man on the earth and whether we should abuse the creation or not. What I'm going to say is that in this narrative, man is the pinnacle. And he is given all the grass and the fruits of the trees to eat. Have you noticed what he was not given to eat? Vegetables only. He's a vegetarian now. God does not allow him to eat animals. That's just a fact which we need to see. So, and then comes another mysterious statement. 6 days are over. The evening and the morning, the sixth day. And then God rested. There is this final ta 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 ta. So this is God's rest. And what do we know about it? We don't know about it. There are no words which could describe it. But there is some words we find in other places of the scripture which tells us that if you are really a terrible person, you are not going to enter his rest. So the idea is maybe it is a wonderful thing to enter God's rest, whatever it means. Right? So this is the final note in this thing. The seventh day, the day of God's rest. By the way, there it has no evening or morning. This is day which lasts forever. Now, of course, the first narrative. The second narrative, which I don't know how I'm going to do all of that in time. But the second narrative starts with a completely different universe. Remember, this is watery universe. Chaotic water, and God puts order. No, the second universe, there is no water. It's a dry, parched land, a desert. Nothing, no vegetation, no people, no Leviathan. And then suddenly, the water starts seeping from the underground sources of water. Remember, I mean, in the model of the world, which people had at the time, there is this dome, there's water, and on top of that's where the rain comes when you open the window in the dome. And if you open them a lot, flood happens. And then there is water which comes from underneath. And then this water underneath starts seeping into this parched land. And what do you get? Clay, mud. And God takes mud and shapes men. This is a totally different, this not an abstract story as we just saw in the first chapter of Genesis. This is the second chapter. This is mud, and God makes man out of clay. And then comes this absolutely gorgeous words. He breathes into him the breath of life. So there is this divine breath in us. If you don't want to believe it, don't believe it. But it's a wonderful thing to believe that there is something other than just clay. So, so he makes this man, Adam. Adam just means man, by the way, in Hebrew, nothing much. He makes man, and he puts him in this wonderful place called Garden of Eden. And there are trees there with all kinds of fruits. And there are two trees, the most special trees, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and the tree of life, two trees in the center of the garden. They're really beautiful. We'll see. And he tells the man, don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. By the way, there is multiple philosophical, theological discussion. What is the tree of knowledge of good and evil? I actually have very simple thing. It's like heaven and earth. It's good and evil means everything. If you sort of eat of the tree, you will know everything. And we shall see why I say that in a second. But it's a lonely place, so Adam needs companions. So God makes all kinds of animals and brings them to Adam. He says, oh, this is this. And Adam names them. He says, oh, this is an elephant, this is a sheep, this is a dog. Dogs are important. So, but there is no companion for Adam. None of them, even dogs, don't quite cut it. And then comes this another central passage in the beginning. God puts a very deep sleep onto Adam. And then he takes his rib and forms a woman out of that rib. And wakes Adam up and brings the woman to him as a father brings the bride. Literally, he sort of brings to introduce. And Adam is ecstatic, wouldn't you? He says, this is the bone of my bone, the flesh of my flesh. That is the center. So it's not the rib. It's this profound idea of fundamental unity between man and woman, between husband and wife. In some sense, indivisible unity. We'll be talking about it later. And things are very good. But, you see, things don't last. Here comes the third chapter of Genesis, which tells us about a certain animal. This animal is a snake. And snake, as we all know, is the wisest of all animals. Or so our author tells us. By the way, when you think of the snake, don't think that he goes like that, like a snake. Oh, he's a handsome guy with 2 legs, 2 arms. You know. So he comes. We will see, it's clear. But by the way, there are pictures from ancient Near East which show snakes with arms and legs. By the way, they just discovered some ancient snake with. I never use archaeology, paleontology, or anything to understand the biblical stories. But so here comes the snake, and he decides to talk to a couple. And he says, oh, God told you not to eat of any of these fruits. He's clever. And this is it's probably the greatest dialogue in all the literature ever. Because you have to pay attention to what it says. Because he doesn't say, oh, he didn't tell you to eat from this tree. He says, he told you not to eat from any tree whatsoever. And the woman said, oh, no, she says. He told us that we could eat from all the trees, except we should not touch and eat from this tree of knowledge of good and evil. She exaggerates. There's nothing about touching. There's beautiful rabbinical commentary which says at that point, the snake runs to the tree and shakes it to show that nothing happens. See, nothing happens. I touched it. I don't know if it happened. It's not in the book, you know. And rabbinical commentaries sometimes. But this is a good one. So he touches the tree, and no, he doesn't touch the tree. He says, well, nothing will happen. No, this is not so. If you eat from the fruit, you will be like God or gods. Don't forget, in Hebrew, Elohim means gods. One God is addressed as Elohim, gods. Deep meaning, we're not going into the discussion of that, but you will be like gods. So she looks, and there are three things. She says, it's good to eat the tree, taste. It's wonderful to see. And the third thing, it will give me this knowledge. Three things. Later on, if you ever get as far in the Bible as first letter of John, that's New Testament, he talks about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. This is three dominant things which drive us. So this is the lust of the flesh, eating, the lust of the eye, possessing, would be nice to possess the tree, and pride of life. I really want to be like God. So this drives her, and she takes the fruit, she eats it, and she gives it to her poor husband, who of course cannot resist. I mean, he's, by the way, through this entire story, not a squeak. He's present, he eats the fruit, but... And what happens? They see, what do they see? They see that they're naked, and they're ashamed. And soon God will be coming. So they have to hide. They run into the forest, into the garden to hide from God. Silly idea, but that's what they do. And then the cool of the day comes. In paradise it gets hot. It's like here in Palo Alto, we're pretty close, except for earthquakes. So it gets cool, and God goes for a walk. And they're not there. So he says, where are you? And they say, oh, we're hiding. And God says, why are you hiding? You ate from the tree. And Adam says, well, we're hiding because we saw that we're naked. I missed that. And God says, oh, you know that you're naked because you ate from the tree. And here comes this remarkable thing, because they have to explain themselves. So Adam, of course, is the greatest. He says, the woman, the one who gave me. So first blame the woman, and then blame God. But I'm just telling you, this is what he says. She made me eat it. Of course. And the woman, of course, blames it on the snake. Snake told me. And the snake is silent. He accomplished whatever he wanted. So here comes this terrible punishment. God first tells the snake that from now on, these are gone. You're going to slither and eat the dust, because that's what snakes do. And he slithers away. We do not see him for a while. And then, this is the passage which explains the terrible state we're in. What is the terrible state? God says to the woman, he says, you are going to suffer terrible pains at birth. And indeed, the only species which suffers terrible pain at birth is human species. For a dog or a cow, it's a simple, natural thing. Not for a woman. Any woman who had a child, or any man who had to be present at this rather terrible experience, it is awful. uh, it's a terrible curse, no question about it. So you would suffer that, but you will still long for your husband. So in spite, I mean, it's really inexplicable with all these pains, they still get married to us. I mean, that's only the Bible could explain that. And to the man comes our fundamental curse, meaning you will have to come to a night. You will have to till the ground, sort of in the sweat of your brow. So the curse of work, the terrible curse. And the terrible curse is not work, because original intent, when God put Adam in the garden, was that he would cultivate the garden. So it's not work. It's just now we could never, we write code and it's always wrong. It's true. And this is this futility of our work. It's this constant failure which we have to face while working. That's what it's talking about. And here we come to this great painting of Masaccio. I would claim that it is the painting which started modern European art. He's the first artist who, instead of static, peaceful faces, was able to produce this image of a terrible despair. They are expelled from paradise. That's what happened in the book. They are expelled from paradise. The paradise is closed for us. Okay? And it's closed permanently because God puts a guard. You see, this picture doesn't go far enough. There is a seraph there and a flaming sword. There's actually seraphim, so at least 2 seraphs, but artistic license, and this sort of rotating flaming sword. So you really cannot get there. People try, no way. So we are expelled. So this is the beginning of the human story. So the story which we have to understand, it's central to our civilization, but it's also central to human existence, because it's the first story which tells us that we are somehow broken. Right? And you say, well, I don't believe these stories. You don't have to believe in the stories. Look at the mirror. Look at yourself. I mean, we are broken. And that is this great mystery which this story is trying to tell us about. So I did not cover the book of Genesis. I covered 3 first chapter. There are 50. I will have to make a tough decision before next lecture what I'm going to be doing. My plan was to jump into a very important subject of the Holy War, which is important for all of us and central to biblical narrative. But I might talk a little bit more because there are just so many wonderful stories which you need to know. But I hope that no matter what I say here, you would go and start reading this book. It's fun, guys. It's really fun. Don't look at the gold. You don't have to buy a leather cover Bible, but read it. It's great book. The title of the lecture is In the Beginning.